Kathleen, thank you so much for taking this time today to talk about this garden, which is now a good few years ago, isn't it, really?
It is. I was just looking at some of the paperwork this morning, and it's 2017 is when we started the process in, behind the scenes.
Yes, so there's been a lot of gardens under the bridge, so to speak, since then.
Yeah, we've actually learned a lot. I wonder if, if we went back, what would we do differently?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really interesting thing that I've just this morning in the mail received a copy of Wild, this latest book of Claire Tackash's.
Yeah.
And it's got photos of Stone Hill in it, the wood end garden that I did now 10 years ago. And when you get interviewed about that stuff, you're always talking about something as if it's current, but it's something 10 years ago. And you go, I wouldn't do it the same now, Yeah. I've moved on. Yeah. So what was it that most interested or engaged you about that site and that job?
I think it was actually the couple themselves. I sort of really connected with them, and I also felt that they were really sort of enthusiastic about the potential of what their life could be like if they had this garden. So I suppose I really thought, wow, this is awesome. Young people coming to me, willing to put some money behind it. So that was probably the biggest thing. And then the site, there was a beautiful view to Hanging Rock. So that was gorgeous. So that was beautiful. And I really did like the design from the architect because it was interesting. It had lots of different roof lines. And I could sort of see straight away the potential for different rooms and courtyards. So probably though, definitely the clients and the architecture is probably what inspired me the most. And then the landscape definitely was second, but that landscape, even though when I arrived it was a blank paddock, I could tell that there was going to be a housing estate, even if it was going to be a nice one. So there weren't that many existing trees that were nice on the site. So there was only one view across to Hanging Rock. That was probably the nicest part of the site.
So what did you see as the biggest challenges of that site?
The soil was heavy clay, so that was a challenge. And also that I knew that Wood End got quite severe frost. So I thought, okay, we've got some hard soil, tough conditions. And I also could see that we needed to bring in a lot of, soil if we were going to do anything. So that was probably the key. There were also some existing really large pine trees that were running along the perimeter. Right.
So why did you immediately think you would need to bring in soil? Just because there was no sort of growable topsoil on the site?
Yeah, definitely for that reason. Also, the levels were sort of all over the place. So I could sort of see that in order to create sort of functional space around the house and a little bit more level for paving and kids and sort of just being practical with entertaining, we needed really sort of flat area around the house. And when I arrived, the house was really and again, you couldn't see this on camera, but there was a bit of a moat around the house and a bit of a drop down.
Yeah, right. So you had to look at lifting those levels.
So I really wanted to lift the levels, and I actually like playing around with soil levels anyway, just because I feel like it adds a little bit of interest. And you can probably see from my garden behind me that I've probably overdone the mounding. I like mounding up things and creating a bit of a journey through a space.
Well, and in a situation like you were in Wood End, because it was a recent subdivision, there was a sense that that the fences and the house placements were all pretty arbitrary, wasn't there, initially? And it's one of the ways that you can create a sense of location for the house and a sense of inevitability of the house placement is to control those levels around that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really sort of early on I realized that the house itself was really lovely architecturally, but it was very white. And when you're in a housing estate, even if it's a beautiful one, like they've got a lot of space around them, that sort of stark whiteness, particularly with the Australian sunlight, amplifies it, that I really felt like you needed to have a foil of green around you. And I think they could see that too. So investing in the garden was probably, just as important as the architecture, because I think it was going to, enhance the architecture if we got it right.
Absolutely. So I assume that given that a lot of your work is in a kind of a tree changer
Yeah.
area, that you do a lot of work with families. What are the kind of things that families are currently asking for?
Yeah, they generally ask for very similar things. They're always, I think sometimes they might be in love with the concept of country like living. So, and that's good and bad. So they want the vegetable garden, they want the, the chook house, an area for the kids to play. Um, so they ask for those sort of things. The only thing that's the downside to all of that is um, a true understanding of the maintenance of properties that large is completely underestimated. And I think until you really, are doing it, you never truly appreciate it. You know, even when I was creating my garden here, and I love being out in the garden all the time, I still have, I may have overdone it. There's still a lot of maintenance. Even if you do a low maintenance garden, there's always maintenance.
Yes. And do you find that people are getting more used to that idea or less? Like what are the trends in terms of commitment of owners towards maintenance?
I think now it's sort of a lot more acceptable to for the average person to have someone come in periodically and help them with their garden. Um, I feel like that's now more available to people. It's like having someone assist you in helping clean the house. That having a maintenance person, it's not such a big deal anymore, and you can work alongside them or get them in for some of the big jobs. And that's how I would approach it as well. So if my garden gets a bit hairy on me and I haven't got time and I'm busy, I'll bring in someone to help me, bring it back. And that's where if you have a really great garden structure, you can actually bring a garden that is looking a bit wild and woolly back very quickly and have it looking good again. So I think on all the gardens that we do, we try to create that really strong structure. It might be loose and informal looking in its planting, but there's actually a good structure to work with.
That's a really good point, that by having a really evident and strong underlying kind of fabric, visible structure, that one, it probably means that things can go a bit hairier before the whole thing falls apart, but
Yeah.
also it's quite clear what you need to then be restoring it back to.
Yeah, I think so. And I think you've got to be realistic that people take holidays and are out of their gardens for a month, or, they get busy. So it's got to be able to be brought back and, still look good. And then some people have different levels of messiness that they can live with. So, yeah.
Yes. That, and it strikes me that when I was growing up, no one would have considered their backyard to be a kind of lifestyle space beyond the idea it might have had an above ground swimming pool in it. There was the incinerator, the clothesline, a few
All the
fruit
practical
trees.
stuff.
They were fundamentally utilitarian spaces. Whereas obviously the work that you'd be called into, people have got a starting with a higher expectation of that, but they're wanting to create these lifestyle spaces that presupposes that there is going to be a beauty and potentially an irresistibility about that space. And that's just not going to happen without constant interaction or intervention, is it?
That's right. And I really think that the garden isn't static. And I'm not inclined to design for people who just want a showpiece. I really am attracted to clients who want to get in there and garden. So I suppose when I first have that initial site meeting, that's what I'm looking for, someone that I could collaborate with in the design process, but also that I feel like they're going to make the garden their own and they're going to really enjoy it. And to be honest, even the people that I've had as clients who weren't gardeners, and they really didn't, and they sort of ticked the box that they were definitely going to get a maintenance person in. And I thought, I don't know, how we're going to go. They've actually turned into gardeners. So yeah. I love that,
Oh, golly, I love that so much. It's my favorite thing as a designer.
Yeah. It's really rewarding.
Do you find then that within the range of jobs required for maintenance, people will pay someone to do a certain amount of it and do a certain amount of it themselves?
I think most of the jobs that we design now for clients, that they're doing a combination. They're doing some of the jobs that they like to do themselves, and some of the hard yakka, you know, they might be jobs that you need every 6 months or, you know, yearly, that they'll bring someone in, the heavier work, they'll get an expert in to do it. So, or just some, you know, people who will just do the grunt work. So yeah, and I feel like that's actually a good combination, because it gets you always enjoying your garden and you're taking the best bits out of it. And I think if you can afford to do that, I think that's wise.
It's interesting though, isn't it, how there doesn't seem to be a responding workforce being developed.
Yeah, I know.
I don't understand how such an obvious need and niche is not being automatically filled.
It is absolutely, like, it's really changed from when, you know, we were going through college and learning. There was a lot more people who were doing garden maintenance, and sort of had a real interest in horticulture. I feel like sometimes that's dropped off a little bit in, you know, the doers out there. But what I find is now, in order to get enough maintenance people for the clients that I have, I do a lot more training up of them. So let's say on the weekend, there was someone in my garden who I really was keen to give a job to, you know, pass them on to a client to be their maintenance person, but I had to be confident that they knew what they were doing. So we had 5 weeks in this garden every Saturday. You know, let's go through the plants that I'm always using. This is how we cut them back. And now I feel confident that, you know, that they can sort of, you know, work well, even though they haven't had any official, you know, horticultural training. They will, you know, do a good job on the garden.
So what do you find are the most passing phases in family life that are either over or underestimated when families come to you for a design?
Probably the biggest one is that young families would love to have their children's play equipment really close to the house, and they'd like to be able to keep an eye on them, and they'd like to have the pool visible from the kitchen sink, and, you know, all of that, which sometimes aesthetically, particularly with the children's play equipment, isn't very pleasing, and that we could do a better job of, you know, I like to integrate it into the garden. So, you know, have it amongst plants and bushes, and even have vines climbing over maybe the trampoline netting, and to soften the whole thing. So, because really it's only for 5 years, probably from when the child's small to, you know, 5 years of age, that they actually, you know, need to be close to the house and to be visible. But like you know, with a pool, you don't want to be, you know, looking at them from the kitchen window. You really actually need to be there supervising them. So yeah, I agree with you, Michael. I think, you know, incorporate play equipment, be there where you need to be them when, you know, be with them when they're at a certain age group. And then the rest of the time, I think as they get older, they want to be out in nature. They want to, you know, they don't want mum and dad to be looking, you know, in on them and being helicopter parents. They want to do their thing. So I think that's really important.
It's a thing that is nearly impossible to understand as a young parent, is how quickly these phases pass, isn't it? You know, well, both of us have been through this.
Absolutely.
Whatever phase you're in, you just go, oh man, this is going to go on for years. And, you know, it's ridiculous how fast. Yeah.
And even like cubby huts, I remember, you know, spending a lot of money on a cubby hut, and, you know, I wanted it to match the house, and I had to be this and that. And oh my God, I've turned it into a chook house now. And, you know, I think, you know, they played in it for a year or two, you know, and only when their friends were around. The rest of the time it was idle. So yeah, you learn a lot.
You do. So at the other end of the scale, what do you think are the most enduring features of a garden that are currently being requested, that you think you'll be using this for the next 20 or 30 years?
Definitely entertainment areas. So somewhere, you know, attached to the house or nearby, where you would actually bring out food from the kitchen, or if you've already got a kitchen out there, that type of thing. So extending the living areas out, and also large shade trees. So the one behind me is a Chinese elm, which is one of my favorites, and I planted that 8 years ago. So yeah, it's awesome, and it's one of my favorite trees. And so we planted it when the kids were small, and, you know, it's been fantastic. So I would always plant a lot of trees where I could on people's properties as part of the design, just because I really see a lot of value in them.
What about those casual areas that, we've well, what would it be? 15 years ago or something, it was that kind of pizza oven thing that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
Given how many pizza ovens I know in friends' gardens, I've had very few pizzas out of them. They are the biggest pain, like you got to light those things. We did when our kids were at primary school, they had a pizza oven when grade 4 was at a local another school. They went off to a rural, in Woodend's already rural, but a proper rural school. And
Yeah, yeah.
every Wednesday afternoon,
Yeah.
there was an activity, and one of us parents would have to go out there at like 8 o'clock in the morning and light this fire to make sure the
Yeah.
pizza oven was at the right point. But so what do you think of the fire pit? Are we, how does this, is this an enduring phase?
Yeah, it's interesting, the fire pit, because I have one myself, and personally, me and my husband Rob, we don't actually use it that much ourselves, but the kids do use it when their friends are over. So it did get a workout on the weekend, and so I see there's a value in it. But from a design point of view, I don't really like to have them on show, like right in your face with a big concrete bench around them, that is not movable. I'm probably more now learning from my own experience to have it sort of part of the garden, a destination that you do go to, but if you don't go to, you don't look at it for 9 months of the year and never use it. So that's probably how I treat them. And I think really in all gardens there should be little nooks and crannies that you go to have time to reflect, or just go to sitting and have a cup of tea or whatever. They're the special things that I like in a garden.
And it's interesting you talk about those destination areas, because I think the default position is to assume that a dining table outside is going to be the kind of default location. And I find the only time I want to use a dining table outside is when I'm actually dining.
Yeah.
Every other time, if I'm just having a coffee
You
or
want a relaxing
wine,
chair.
I don't want to sit at it. I don't want to sit with the glass in front of me. I don't want to lean forward and pick it up and then lean back. I want it beside me in some little nook in the garden somewhere that my legs are not tucked under a table,
Yeah. Yeah, I so agree. And I think you sort of learn that as you get older and you experience
spend a
your
lot of
garden
time
in different
sitting.
ways.
Yeah, and when you start to when you realize that your garden is actually fundamentally about creating sitting spaces, not about gardening spaces,
Yeah.
yeah. But I am interested in the kind of that idea of shifting needs, and at the other end of family life, the notions of maybe like a retreat positions. When I'm doing big areas of planting, I will be thinking about, if this was all to be stripped away and just go back to the key woody plants and just be mown, so you can get Jim's mowing in or whatever, then it would be, then it could still work. How to pare things back.
And I'm in the process of doing that with my own garden. So I've used a lot of perennials, and you can see that sort of in the far garden bed behind me. But I've also then got a little bit excited, and I've started putting them in different pockets, which wasn't part of the plan. But being a plants lover, you do that. And there's a lot of coffees. And so now I'm in the process of actually pulling them out and putting in more just low maintenance, strappy sort of plants, and just keeping the high intense, areas where I need to cut back, every season in a particular zone. And then the other areas, simplifying the planting, because it actually looks better way simplified, but I get a bit excited and have too much stuff. I do lots of things that I shouldn't be doing, that I know that I don't do on other people's places, but I play around in my own.
It's a really good lesson, that, isn't it? Rather than peppering the really decorative, high demand stuff around the garden, which often doesn't actually end up looking that great anyway.
No, you're right.
It makes so much more sense to go, okay, let's do one big splash in one part of the garden, and then have everything else really beautiful but simply maintained.
That's right. Yeah. So give me 12 months. That's what I plan on doing.